This week in Idaho, the death penalty remains an option in the Moscow murder trial. Lori Daybell faces more life sentences after an Arizona conviction, and a WSU instructor is fired after assaulting a student over a MAGA hat. Also, Labrador and other AGs warn CEOs to drop DEI or face legal action. That and so much more. This is the Yokel Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you an overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Welcome! Glad to have you here with us today. If it's your first time, glad to have you. If you are a regular listener, thank you so much for continuing to watch us. Hope you all had a very blessed week. I did with all the spring yard work. You can probably tell by my complexion, maybe a little bit more tan or just hot. I had to do some yard work and it was very satisfying. It was work. It was nice, but yeah, you ever have a time where you come out of like the winter time and then you have all the yard work and everything to do and then you realize how out of shape you are? Well, I had that going out in the yard and trying to use the weed trimmer and my arms are still sore. They shouldn't be. They shouldn't, but you know, there again, I guess winter does that and it means I need to work out a little bit more in the winter. But independent of all that, I did get to explore Idaho a little bit. I hope you did as well. Went over to the Owyhees, if you know where those are, here in southern Idaho. They're off towards the west, kind of on the border with Idaho and Oregon. Very, very pretty area to go. If you live here in the Treasure Valley, highly recommend it right now. The weather is perfect for them. You don't have to deal with a lot of weeds and hot temperatures because there is no shade over there. But with that said, coming back to the show, another Idaho topic, we have a very great lineup for you today. On the first half, we have updates about the Moscow murder trial, which is probably the reason you clicked on this video, and some other trials. Plus, for the middle half, we'll be going head deep into the Boise issue on the Boise Pride flag and all of that has transpired. If you haven't heard about it, it's going to be juicy. And to close out, we'll also be staying in Boise and covering BSU, which has gotten itself involved in another issue, particularly on age discrimination claims. But with any further ado, we'll hop into it here with our first story. There has been a significant ruling in the Bryan Kohberger case affirms that the death penalty will not be deterred by a medical diagnosis. Judge Stephen Hippler recently ruled that Kohberger could still face the death penalty if convicted of murdering 4 University of Idaho students despite his autism diagnosis. Prosecutors successfully argued that only intellectual disability, not autism, precludes capital punishment under the Supreme Court's precedents. If you haven't heard anything about this story, be a little surprising, the 30-year-old former criminology student faces trial this August for allegedly stabbing to death 3 U of I students at their off-campus Moscow residence in November of 2022. Shocking, it's been so long. In addition to pretrial rulings, the judge determined that the crucial DNA evidence found on a knife sheath at the crime scene will be admissible. But witnesses must avoid potentially misleading terms like touch DNA or trace DNA. Testimony from the surviving roommate, DM, who described seeing an intruder with, quote, bushy eyebrows, will also be permitted as highly relevant evidence. The court will allow surveillance footage showing a white sedan near the crime scene, with experts permitted to testify that the vehicles in multiple videos are the same, reportedly matching Kohberger's Honda Elantra. In conclusion, for Moscow and its victims and the families who have waited over 2 years for justice, these rulings represent an important progress for the case, which will be closely watched as it begins on August 11th. And speaking of another murder case that was very hot about this time last year, Lori Daybell, already serving life in Idaho for the murders of her 2 children, has now been found guilty in Arizona for co-conspiring to murder her estranged husband, Charles Vallow. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted her on the evidence that she plotted with her brother, Alex Cox, to kill Charles for his $1 million life insurance policy and clear the way for her marriage to Chad Daybell, a prophecy writer with whom she shared doomsday beliefs. Just, saying what the court said there. Representing herself and showing little remorse, often smiling and laughing in court, Lori failed to sway the jury. Shocker on that one. Prosecutors showed her twisted religious justifications and financial motives, while her own brother testified that she had claimed Charles was no longer alive. Charles obviously feared for his life and had sought a mental health evaluation for her before his death. This verdict delivers justice, affirming that no one is above the law. As her family expressed relief, the message was clear. Evil will not prevail, and justice for the victims stands firm. And heading up north to Pullman, Washington State University has terminated instructor Patrick Mahoney after he was arrested for allegedly assaulting an undergraduate student, Jay Saney, over the student's support for President Donald Trump. The incident occurred on the evening of February 28th, when Saney, wearing a red Make America Great Again hat, was confronted by Mahoney and another individual, Gerald Hoff, near a local restaurant. According to police in eyewitness reports, Mahoney seized Saney's hat and threw it into the street, taunting him with profanities. When Saney tried to retrieve his hat, Mahoney and Hoff allegedly grabbed him and threw him to the ground and struck him multiple times, resulting in cuts and bruises. Saney reported being kicked and beaten, and the police later confirmed that Mahoney admitted to striking Saney in the jaw while he was on the ground. The university, as you can expect, immediately suspended Mahoney from teaching and, following the police investigation, terminated his employment. Hoff, a graduate teaching assistant, was also relieved of all teaching duties. The case has drawn some national attention, especially among conservative media outlets, shocker there, highlighting concerns about free speech and political bias on college campuses. Saney, who describes himself as a minority engineering student, publicly called for tolerance of differing political views, stating, "We have the First Amendment, and it is not acceptable that I should be attacked simply because of my political beliefs." And speaking of political beliefs, Idaho Attorney General Raúl Labrador is joined by 14 other state attorney generals that are urging the Business Roundtable, a coalition representing over 200 of the nation's top CEOs, to abandon its diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, initiatives. In a letter, Labrador and his colleagues argued that these DEI policies are, quote, unlawful and misguided, end quote, claiming they replace free market principles with divisive and costly mandates. Labrador stated, quote, corporations have an obligation to focus on creating value for their shareholders. When that duty is replaced with race-based hiring and DEI mandates, it raises serious legal concerns under state and federal law. These companies should return to merit-based practices and sound business judgment. The American people want to return to fairness, where individuals are judged by their abilities, not by their immutable characteristics, end quote. The Attorney Generals warned that the Business Roundtable's shift away from merit-based hiring not only undermines economic growth and shareholder returns, but could also expose companies to legal action. Maybe a little wink there, I have no idea. The letter concluded by urging the roundtable to recommit to merit-based hiring and abandon DEI or risk intervention from state attorney generals. To keep up to date on all the stories we've talked about and more, especially if you've liked the Midweek Report, do us a favor and hit the like button and consider subscribing/following us so you don't miss the next one on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter, or however else you're listening to this. Helps us stay connected with you and reach more folks who love Idaho just like yourself. Speaking of Labrador, he is going to be in here a lot. He will soon face questioning under oath. Judge Jonathan Mendema had ruled that Labrador must be deposed for up to 2 hours in a whistleblower lawsuit brought by former Deputy Attorney General Daphne Huang. Huang, once the legal counsel for the Department of Health and Welfare, alleged she was fired in retaliation for raising ethical concerns about how $72 million in child care grants were managed. Her memos had supported the agency's practices, but Labrador's office withdrew her advice and launched a high-profile investigation. When Huang lost her job, she claimed it was because she spoke up. Labrador's office tried to block his deposition, but Judge Mendema rejected their motion, emphasizing that Labrador's knowledge and reasons for Huang's termination were crucial to the case. When Labrador did not appear for his original scheduled deposition, the judge sanctioned the Attorney General's office, ordering it to pay Huang's legal expenses. Quote, "No one is above the law, including the Idaho Attorney General," Huang's attorney declared after the ruling. As the October trial approaches, eyes are on the rare spectacle. Idaho's top legal official compelled to answer under oath for decisions made behind closed doors. And speaking of a story that blew up on Twitter this last week, which you may or may not have heard about, before dawn on Easter Sunday, Idaho activist David Pettinger scaled the Boise City Hall flagpole, replacing the controversial pride and donor flags with the historic Appeal to Heaven flag. Outfitted in tactical gear and filmed by Casey Whalen, Pettinger bagged the original flags and hoisted the new banner, declaring it a permitted wartime naval flag under Idaho's recently passed House Bill 96, which we have done a bill breakdown on, so you can go deep into that. But for the general overview on the law, it restricts government flag displays to only official U.S., state, military, POW/MIA, or tribal flags. Sadly, lacks explicit enforcement mechanisms. A misstep there. By late morning, Mayor Lauren McLean arrived, promptly removing the Appeal to Heaven flag on Easter Sunday and restored the pride and donor flags, despite warnings from Attorney General Raúl Labrador and calls from conservatives to uphold the law. Law enforcement, citing the law's lack of penalties, took no action. And Labrador has since hinted that lawmakers could soon add enforcement provisions to ensure compliance, probably next session most likely. For conservatives, Pettering's act was bold and appears to be meant to draw attention to McLean's hypocrisy, mainly on the fact that she wants it to be welcoming, but for just one group. While the mayor continues to be defiant on state law and the cultural symbols that she is flying there at Boise City Hall, it'll be interesting to see how the people of Boise react. And continuing with the Boise City Mayor, who refuses to remove the LGBTQ+ pride flag from City Hall, despite the clear state law banning unofficial flags, Idaho's Attorney General Raúl Labrador has reminded McLean of her sworn duty to uphold state law, warning that Boise could lose state funding if it continues to flaunt House Bill 96. Instead of complying, McLean accused the state of, quote, acting in bad faith, end quote, and threatening legal action, claiming the law is legally defective and unenforceable due to the lack of penalties. More on the fault of the legislature there. We won't get into that in a moment. Conservative activists responded by covering, as we just said, the pride flag with the Appeal to Heaven flag, which has gotten some serious, let's just say, public frustration after the mayor did take it down and replace it. Many conservatives see McLean's actions as a blatant disregard for the rule of law and the will of Idaho's legislature, undermining the respect for state authority. With lawmakers promising to add enforcement provisions next session, the standoff sets a troubling precedent. An elected official openly choosing which laws to follow, risking public trust and state resources in the process. And finally, getting out of all that and over to eastern Idaho a little bit, over by Twin Falls. On December 19th, 2024, county deputies over there in Twin Falls responded to a 911 call near Filler, reporting on an aggravated battery with a weapon. Upon arrival, a deputy encountered a 17-year-old suspect who had reportedly stabbed two people. The deputy discharged his firearm, striking the teen. Despite immediate life-saving efforts, the 17-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene. Both stabbing victims were transported to the St. Luke's Magic Valley Regional Medical Center, with one sustaining serious injuries. The deputy was, though, not injured. Now, the reason we bring this all up, the Magic Valley Critical Incident Task Force, led by the Twin Falls Police Department, investigated the shooting, and their findings have recently come out and were independently reviewed by the Canyon County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, which concluded the deputy's actions were justified and that no criminal charges would be filed. Twin Falls Sheriff Jack Johnson acknowledged the tragedy, emphasizing the importance of impartial investigation and expressing condolences to the teen's family and community. The incident remains the only deputy-involved shooting in Twin Falls County for the year. If you didn't know about any of these stories and found value in them, please don't hesitate to share this episode with your friends and family so they can learn more about Idaho and be informed and engaged in the state that we all love. And going back to Boise, we're going to be there quite a little bit for this midweek report. A Boise man installed 12 solar panels on his home in December of 2023, investing about $18,000 in taking out a loan for financing the project. He hoped to build equity and promote clean energy, inspired by neighbors whose Idaho power bills had dropped after getting solar, because the solar would go back on their grid and they'd get a little bit of money back from that would pay off their bill. But just months later, his optimism faded. Idaho Power has proposed slashing the credits it pays to new rooftop solar owners for excess power sent back to the grid, the very thing that kind of pays for the investment. Under the new plan, summer on-peak credits would fall from 16 cents and 99 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour, while off-peak and non-summer rates would drop to as little as 0.959 cents per kilowatt. Not even a penny, my goodness. An 80% decrease for much of the year. The company argues this is to assure fair market prices. But for the gentleman we just talked about, and 13,700 others, the change means their panels will barely save them money, making it nearly impossible to break even. With Idaho Power's annual rate changes and rising fixed rates, many Idahoans may have to worry about their solar investments. Some as high as $100,000 may never pay off. And going from solar to Indians, the Shoshone-Paiute tribes are moving forward with their first ever resort and casino. Planned along Interstate 84 between Boise and Mountain Home, the proposed casino is expected to make tens of millions annually for Idaho's economy and create jobs. The tribe has also pledged to share 5% of net game revenue with local schools to smooth it over there a little bit. If you know our reporting on this, which we did a little bit ago, I think a couple months back, we did a midweek report where we talked about how the public is not the most happy about it, but there again, it's the tribal land, so it's up to them. But they are partnering with the experienced Coeur d'Alene tribe. The Shoshone-Paiute hope to replicate the economic benefits tribal gaming has brought to other parts of the state, saying, quote, "We want to solve our own problems and provide for our people," said Chairman Brian Manson. The new resort will offer gaming, luxury accommodations, and entertainment while honoring the tribe's ancestral lands. I'm not 100% sure how that'll work, but I hope it does. The tribe plans to submit their application to the U.S. Department of the Interior later this year for permission. And speaking of something way more encouraging, Governor Brad Little signed the Make Forests Healthy Again Act. I know we've got MAHA and we got MAGA. I don't know what that one makes, but it'll be fun to add it to the list. He signed it over there in Coeur d'Alene this last week, directing the Idaho Department of Lands, or IDL, to ramp up partnerships with the U.S. Forest Service. If you will remember from last week, we talked about an executive order that came out from Trump, which this aligns with. Trump's order was Free Our Forest Act, aimed to revive logging in millions of acres of federal forests in Idaho, focused on reducing wildfire risks and revitalizing rural communities, especially here in Idaho, that were primarily on logging, but when the logging industry went away, they've been really struggling. With 40% of our state covered in forest and much of it federally managed and untouched for decades, Little emphasized the urgent need to clear this, quote, tinderbox of fuel, end quote, that threatens our homes and our air quality each summer, if you know what I mean. The act targets vulnerable areas using Idaho's Forest Action Plan and fire risk maps for timber harvesting, mechanical thinning, and something I've seen so many signs about when I travel up north, prescribed burns. But this isn't just about safety, it's also about jobs as well. Forestry already supports over 30,000 Idahoans, and expanded logging will hopefully bring more work to rural areas that are struggling to thrive. The Department of Lands Director Dustin Miller noted Idaho handles about 25% of federal timber sales, a number set to grow as we prioritize fire-prone zones near expanding communities. This is a chance to steward our lands wisely, protect our neighbors, and build a strong future for rural Idaho. And speaking of things in Coeur d'Alene, kind of burning down a little bit, but more metaphorically in this case, former Coeur d'Alene School Board Trustee Allie Anderton resigned Wednesday, the 23rd, following her arrest early Easter morning. Post Falls police stopped Anderton around 1 a.m. near Beckett Road due to a broken taillight, noting signs of impairment including slurred speech and lack of coordination. Court records show Anderton was charged with driving under the influence and possession of drug paraphernalia after refusing a breath testing. Officers discovered burnt tinfoil and a dollar bill with white powder residue in her pocket, which Anderton allegedly admitted to using to smoke cocaine earlier that night. In her resignation letter, Anderton stated her decision was necessary regardless of the outcome, as the situation had, quote, burdened this board and district, end quote. She expressed heartbreak that this would impact, quote, the momentum we worked so hard to create together, end quote. The situation comes amid revelations of her prior DUI convictions from 2002 and 2007. The Coeur d'Alene School Board will address the Zone 1 vacancy at their May 12th meeting, which, if you want to be involved in that, might want to go check it out if you're in the area. Hey there, if you've made it to this point in the midweek report, probably means you really love stuff about Idaho. So, why not consider subscribing to Local Yokel Idaho? It's in the name, we talk about Idaho. That way you don't miss any of our future content here on YouTube, or highly recommend our Substack as we grow that out, and any of our future midweek reports. And speaking of trials, we're going to have plenty of those. A confidential agreement has ended the high-profile medical malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Ryan Cole, a well-known Idaho pathologist and outspoken critic of the COVID-19 mandates. The suit alleges Dr. Cole's cancer diagnosis led a patient, JB, to undergo unnecessary and invasive surgery, only later to discover she had no cancer. After months of mediation and a scheduled jury trial, both parties agreed to dismiss the case with prejudice, which basically means it cannot be refiled. Each side will pay its own legal costs, and no public details of the settlement have been released. Dr. Cole, who has faced professional backlash for challenging mainstream COVID-19 narratives and promoting medical freedom, continues to serve on Idaho's Central District Health Board and retains his medical license in the state. While critics highlighted the disagreement among pathologists over his diagnosis, the confidential resolution underscores the complexity of the medical industry when it comes to legal things and decisions of this nature, and the legal risks faced by doctors who challenge prevailing medical opinions. The lack of public disclosure leaves many questions unanswered, obviously, but for now, Dr. Cole remains a practicing physician and a prominent voice for patient choice here in Idaho. And coming to the story I hinted at earlier about BSU is once again under fire, this time from former executive director Lisa Gardner, who has filed a whistleblower lawsuit alleging age discrimination and retaliation. Gardner claims she repeatedly advocated for employees over 40 who were passed over for promotions in favor of younger women, and raised concerns about a senior official's relation with a promoted subordinate. After reporting these issues, Gardner was abruptly terminated, which she calls a retaliatory move to silence her. This lawsuit comes on the heels of a $4 million verdict against BSU in the Big City Coffee case, which, if you didn't hear about that, check out our other midweek reports and consider subscribing, where the university's liberal-leaning administration was rebuked by the local jury, an outcome that was surprising for many conservatives who expected the court to side with the university's high-powered legal team. Now, with millions potentially at stake again, students and taxpayers are closely watching to see if BSU's leadership will be held accountable for what some see as a pattern of discrimination and ideological overreach. And speaking of legal things, we should call this the Bar Podcast at this point. The anticipation was high at the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals conducting a rare special sit-in in Moscow. On last Tuesday, Senior Circuit Judges Richard C. Tallman and Randy Smith and Circuit Judge Ryan D. Nelson gathered in the moot courtroom to hear 3 Idaho cases, each reflecting pressing legal and social issues. First on the docket was the Gonzala v. Bondi, where Gabriela Gonzala, a Mexican citizen, appealed a decision denying his bid to remain in the U.S., challenging the government's move to deport him. Next, the panel heard Birch v. City of Chubbuck, an appeal from Rhodey Birch, a former city public worker director who claimed that he was forced out after criticizing the city council's spending. The morning concluded with the USA versus Watson, in which Tyler J. Watson of Nampa contested his 15-year sentence for trafficking more than 10 pounds of fentanyl. The session opened to the public with a government-issued ID, and live stream for broader access offered a rare glimpse of federal appellate proceedings here in Idaho for those that love all the law and want to learn more about it. On last Wednesday, the justices traveled to Coeur d'Alene for further hearings, continuing their engagement with the state's legal battles. Really cool to see that they came and did some stuff locally. And speaking of crime, seems to be the theme of the cast here, and coming to the end of our stories, Tom and Ryan Schiermeyer, a father and son team of Schiermeyer Taxidermy in Twin Falls, are now at the center of a major poaching investigation. Authorities allege the pair accepted orders for trophy mounts of 43 animals illegally harvested by a group of hunters, led by Carl Studner, without proper documentation. When asked for records, Tom submitted an incomplete list, but search warrants later uncovered hidden intake forms and documents linked to the poaching ring at the bottom of a filing cabinet. For many Idahoans, the integrity of hunting tradition and respect for the law are paramount. Responsible hunters value fair chase and conservation, knowing that poaching undermines both wildlife management and the reputation of lawful sportsmen. The Schiermeyers' alleged actions, accepting undocumented trophies and concealing records, not only appears to violate Idaho's strict licensing and record-keeping requirements, but also betrays the trust of Idaho hunters. As the case proceeds, it serves as a reminder that upholding ethical standards protects both the future of hunting and resources itself. And speaking of the good book, I'm definitely going to read that after this episode. It's a very good read. I would highly recommend it. I thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and valuable. If you liked the Midweek Report, make sure to check out our other content, particularly on our Substack, as we're continuing to ramp that up with more articles. Sometimes you'll even get the news sooner there than you will on the Midweek Report. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter by tweeting me at LocalYokelIdaho. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.